First, we are going to have a plugin show and tell of a broken link report plugin by Corey Schmidt at University of Georgia. In this session, Corey will demo UGA's first custom plugin report for ArchivesSpace. This plugin report looks for and returns broken URLs that may exist in note fields across all repositories in ArchivesSpace. Those notes come from resources, archival objects, digital object components, digital object file versions, scope, subject scope and contents, agent, persons, corporate entities, family, and software. Corey is the ArchivesSpace project manager at the University of Georgia Special Collections Libraries. He received his Master of Science in Information from the University of Michigan in 2019 and his Bachelor of Arts in History from Truman State University in 2016. So with that, I'll turn things over to you, Corey, and you should be able to share your screen when you're ready.
All right, awesome. Can you hear me and see my screen?
We can hear you and see your screen.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction. I greatly appreciate it. So yeah, like Jessica was saying, I'm here to sort of demo our broken link checker. Let's see if that's going. Yep, that's good. And this was the first ever plugin that I ever wrote, and the first ever plugin that custom plugin that we've implemented here at the University of Georgia, or UGA. So in this presentation, I'm going to quickly skip past this title slide here. We'll talk about the background, about what led us to sort of go with the plugin, why we went with the plugin in the first place. I'll talk a little bit about learning how to build ArchivesSpace plugins, which Joshua and Brian talked about in an earlier presentation. The results, a brief demo, and an ending slide with a bunch of resources that I found very useful for helping to create my first ever plugin. So a little bit of a background. I was brought on to help manage the migration from Archivist Toolkit to ArchivesSpace here at the University of Georgia. And whenever we were doing that, we were doing a lot of data cleanup. One of the stakeholders approached me and asked, is there any way that we can tell which links are broken in our notes fields? We've got a lot of links that go out to external resources that we link to internal or to hosted places for digital objects, for instance. So we were interested, which of those links are broken, and how can we tell that? So I initially thought of two solutions. One would be to do some web crawling on our own Finding Aid website using a package called Beautiful Soup. It's a Python package, and it does a lot of great things, but it does web crawling, and I had some previous experience with it in the past. However, the cons of doing that would be it would take a while to develop that. I'm a bit rusty when it comes to Beautiful Soup, and also it would take a very long time to run. We have a lot of internal reference links that on our Finding Aid website that it just wouldn't be useful to capture or test those. We also tried doing just a bunch of EAD XML exports from ArchivesSpace and then just sorting through all the XML files and trying to find the links that way. And while it technically worked, it took a very long time to export all 5,500 plus Finding Aids from our ArchivesSpace instance. It also was a lot of data to store on our local computer, and it was, a standard external Python. It was just a Python script, and it wasn't exactly easy for our staff to run by themselves. So as I was talking about this particular problem with our system administrator here at UGA, he suggested to me, hey, why not just make it a plugin? And it was actually a great suggestion. The pros to making a custom report plugin is that it has access to the database directly. And so you get the data very quickly. This saved us a whole bunch of time. I mean, it took, exporting all the XML files took overnight, whereas accessing the database and running the report takes an hour, hour and a half. So that really sped up the time that it took to run this report. It also is a part of ArchivesSpace itself. So we don't have to worry about any external Python scripts or any cron jobs. It's just there and ready to use whenever our staff wants to run it anytime. The cons of building an ArchivesSpace plugin, though, is I personally had no experience writing an ArchivesSpace plugin and was very nervous to start. So it would require a bit of a learning curve, but I think the time invested in learning how to do it was well worth it. And also, we had worries about the long-term maintenance of plugins. Joshua and Brian talked about that a little bit. I'll hit on that a little bit later in the presentation, but I think we're mostly most of our fears are pretty assuaged as far as those go. What was it like learning an ArchivesSpace plugin? Well, for one thing, I was sort of very new to it. I had a strong desire to want to learn how to do it. One of the first steps of creating a plugin, though, is you have to set up a developer environment. Thankfully, ArchivesSpace has some resources available for you to sort of navigate how you set up your own local developer instance. For me, I had our ArchivesSpace system admin to help guide me through that, and he's deployed lots of ArchivesSpace instances, so he was able to walk me through that process. But if anybody here is looking to create a plugin and is very nervous about setting up their own developer environment, a lot of people out there are absolutely willing to help you set that up. The way I set it up might be a bit more complex than how others would, but certainly there's a huge community out there waiting to help you. So after we set up the local ArchivesSpace developer environment, which is just on my machine, it's on my computer, and I just spin it up whenever I want to, then I started to research, okay, now how do I start making the plugin itself? And this is where Alicia Dedelich's custom report presentation from the previous ArchivesSpace Online Forum last year was incredibly helpful. She basically outlined a template of how a custom report plugin should be structured and how the specific MySQL query that sort of queries the ArchivesSpace database for all of that data, how that works and how that returns the data, so that you can then either publish that straight to a report, or like I needed to do, I needed to use a little bit of Ruby and some other stuff to parse out any URLs and clean it up. And that led into the third part of me learning how to build an ArchivesSpace plugin, which was learning a little bit of SQL, but learning a lot more about Ruby. So I needed to learn SQL to figure out how to make the specific statements to the ArchivesSpace database. Excuse me. So once I was able to figure out, okay, this is how SQL is structured, so I can get the textual information out of ArchivesSpace, then I needed to learn how to program in Ruby so that I could then take that raw text, parse out any sort of URLs that existed within those notes, those text fields, and then take those URLs and then test them to see if they generated errors. The screenshot that you see here on the presentation slide is the function that I developed, and the system administrator also helped a little bit develop to test whether a URL generates a good or bad response. So, for the essential steps were of the plugin: first, query the ArchivesSpace database using SQL, and then take that data that is queried from the database and use some Ruby to sort of extract any sort of URLs that might be in that data. Then also use Ruby to test whether those URLs are broken or if they're working fine. And if they are broken, make sure to log them and record them in the report that is generated. The results of a lot of trial and error was a success. So generally over the span of about 2 to 3 months, I was able to sort of write some code in my little IDE of choice. I was using RubyMine in particular. I wrote some code and then I pushed that code to my local ArchivesSpace developer instance. I then started that developer instance up, so I was just running it on my local computer, and then I would test that custom report on my local instance, and I would see what errors were generated and then go back to the code, fix those errors, add some more functionality or do whatever, and repeat the process over again. So like Jessica mentioned at the beginning, this specific report checks notes from a lot of different fields. So if you are making lots of links in resource notes, in biographical historical notes, scope and contents, et cetera, this plugin checks those places and sees if there are any URLs and checks those. There are a few asterisks about what it captures, what it doesn't, and redirects and all that stuff. But upon thinking about it, I think it's better if I show you how it works. So show, don't tell, as they say. So I'm going to quickly move on here. I do have some screenshots of the plugin in case people looking after this just want the presentation slides. But let's see, I'm going to quickly hit escape. Hopefully nothing will blow up on me. And let's go over to ArchivesSpace. So I won't go over how to install a plugin, but there are resources on ArchivesSpace's website on how to install a plugin. But if you do install our Check URLs plugin, which I highly encourage you do because it's cool, once you do that, to access it, all you have to do is go over to the Create button here on the top left, background job, Create Report. All right, and it'll show you the list. We still have all of our sort of standard reports here, and you'll notice when we scroll down here, the Check URLs report with a bit of blurb about what it does. We'll go ahead and select that, and then we need to select the format. So this is where I'm going to take a little bit of a pause. We recommend that users select a CSV format. Whenever I was building the plugin, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I could build this plugin in a way that it automatically defaults for the format to be a CSV? And while that would have been great for user experience and simplicity, as I talked with people on the ArchivesSpace user group listserv, they kind of said, yeah, you could, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work than it's worth. So that we had to sort of adopt that good enough mantra and sort of adapt user expectations and say, hey, to our own faculty and staff, I was like, hey, whenever you do this, just make sure to put it as a CSV. So a little bit of extra step there, but not too bad. So we go ahead and start the job. And it gets going. One thing that you might notice, there it goes. One thing you might notice is that we are currently in the Russell Library repository. And you may be asking yourself, well, hey, does it matter which repository I'm in? And the answer is no, it does not, because this particular plugin runs across all repositories in your ArchivesSpace instance. So it goes over everything. So if you're an institution that has one repository with 50 finding aids, it's going to go over all of those finding aids, right? But if you're an institution that has 30 different repositories with hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of archival objects, it's going to go over all those millions of archival objects and check all of those notes. So to give a bit of a time estimate for those curious to install the plugin and run it for yourself, it takes our instance, which has 5 different repositories, over 5,500 resource records, and over 200,000 archival objects. It takes around an hour to an hour and a half to run. So take that as sort of a guideline of saying, okay, if we have more than that, it's going to take a lot longer. If we have less than that, it may take a little less time. As the report is running, it will track some of the stuff that's going on. So it tells you, hey, I'm actually working here. One of the things that it does is capture redirects. And what it'll do is it'll say, okay, this URL redirected to another place. I'm going to test the redirected URL. And if the redirected URL gives an error, it will make sure to record that. If a redirect redirects up to 5 times, any more than 5 times, it says, okay, I'm done. You really need to check out this URL because it's broken. So also keep that in mind. And for those who are interested in doing more filtering options, I'm going to show you sort of the compromise that we did have to make as far as how to do filtering. But as you see here, as the report is running, it shows what repository it found a broken link in. So it'll actively print out all of this information. But once it is done running, let me go over to Excel here. This is the report that you should see generated. I've spaced it out a little bit so it's a little easier to read. I apologize, it's a lot of text on the screen here. Let me move it a little. But yeah, so at this point, you may be wondering, well, I've got 10 repositories. I don't want to look at all the other repositories. I just want to look at mine, right? In this case, all our staff, all our faculty have to do is, if you want to do that, you go into Excel, you highlight the header row. I'm not sure if you actually have to highlight the header row. You could probably just select one of the cells. Anyway, you go up to the data tab up top here, and I do apologize for the extremely small UI of Excel. You'll then click filter. And once you click filter, a little tiny little bit of arrows will drop down, at which point you can then select whichever repository, identifier, title, note type, for instance, that you want. So for me, I don't want to select all. I just want to look at the University of Georgia archives. And there we go, automatically filtered. So we can look at the University of Georgia archives. We can see that under the identifier title, that's the case where if it's a resource, it gives the ID for the resource. If it's an archival object, it'll give the archival object title or the ID, whichever one it's able to find. It'll give the note type. So in this case, it's a biographical historical note. Sometimes it will write it out. So again, it's a little wonky, but essentially it's the same thing. Give the URL in question and the error code that was generated. So you may find a lot of 404s, certificate verify failed, which I'm not entirely sure about that one, but other errors to just give you a sense of maybe which URLs to check and look at while you're going through it. One other asterisk to note about this is when I was building the plugin, I built it using regular expression that checks the, parses out text to check for a URL. Very rarely, sometimes it'll catch things that it thinks are URLs, but actually are not. So you can be absolutely 100% confident that it will capture what should be a URL in the text, but it also may occasionally get some things that kind of look like URLs, but it just happens that maybe someone just forgot to put a space in between a period or something. So it captures that and tests it. And it's like, hey, this is a broken link. It's like, nah, it's not really a broken link, but close enough. So that's sort of the demo of the plugin. Let me go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint slides and it will continue running. Yep, that's fine. Slideshow. Here we go. Mouse out of the way there. So all of these are just different screenshots going through the steps that I just went through here. And these are some of the resources that I consulted. A lot of great resources from ArchivesSpace itself. Obviously, Alicia's presentation was hugely helpful, so thank you to her. And other different resources, Ruby tutorial, as well as the very last link here is a link to the GitHub where you can find this plugin and install it and update the English YAML file to get all that stuff done, to get it all up and running. But yeah, a huge thanks to obviously Alicia Delich for her amazing presentation. Also, big thank you to Kevin Cottrell, our UGA / Galileo system administrator, to help get me set up with the developer environment. Dallas Pillen, who also helped with sort of figuring out how ArchivesSpace works and some of that stuff. But yeah, so that's it for my presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to take them. So thank you.
Thank you, Corey. That was really great. And a copy of Corey's slides will be included on the event wiki. So check back in the coming days and you'll be able to look at all of his slides and get access to all of these great resources that he's linked here. You can also find already on the wiki a link to this plugin. So if you're like, oh, I need this right now, go ahead and go to the wiki and you can snag that from the session description. We are running behind on time, but we do have one question that I think you can answer quickly, Corey. So what version of ArchivesSpace does this plugin work on?
Absolutely, without doubt, 2.8, but it should be able to work with any recent versions as well. The database structure doesn't really change, and we haven't noticed any changes to Ruby. So yeah, it should be fine with 2.8 and above.
Cool. Thanks, Corey. All right, yeah. Thanks again. We are at time, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our last session of the day. But thanks so much, Corey, for that great plugin show and tell.